Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. This time we're going to be talking about an experiment that is testing the relationship between human behavior and the Earth's electromagnetic field. Our guest is Buryl Payne, a physicist and psychologist. Dr. Payne patented the first biofeedback machine. He is the author of Getting There Without Drugs, Physics and Consciousness, and Biomeditation, Hypnosis, Biofeedback, and Meditation. Probably screwed up those titles. Maybe we can correct those a bit. Dr. Payne also helped create the granola bar, which I think is a wonderful feat, and we're all grateful for that. What about the title of the second book? Did I say that properly?
Biomeditation? That's right.
Oh, okay. Let's define some terms, if we can, before we talk about the specifics of the experiment. Electromagnetic field. What does that mean?
Well, people haven't really figured that out. It's basically a name that people made up to cover their ignorance, like so many terms in physics and science. So you have to take that into account whenever you read science books. But it might be more appropriate to talk about magnetism by itself. That's even more interesting. And magnetism, as I said, is a word that people use because they needed a word to describe things that happen, but it doesn't really explain it, like most words. However, it turns out that it's very, very important because magnetism in various forms affects all of our lives. For example, the Earth was found to have a magnetic field many years ago, and then somebody, after they made compasses, found that it varies all the time. Mostly it varies in such small amounts that it's not noticed. However, it seems that our bodies notice it. Living cells notice it. And this is important information for them. So it's this the kind of research that I'm doing.
When you talk about a magnetic field, let's get maybe a very simple science lesson. We know about a magnet attracting a piece of metal. If you have a light piece of metal and a magnet, that it will pull that toward it. But we don't know how that works? Or we do? Could you give us a very rudimentary scientific explanation?
We don't know how that works. It is not known. But let's say something about what is known, just to give some explanations. Ordinary magnet to hold, say, a note on a refrigerator has a measure of intensity of about 100 Gauss. Gauss was a scientist who lived a couple hundred years ago. The Earth's magnetic field, measured at any point, is about 1 Gauss or less. The field around the body of a human being is 1/1,000,000th of a Gauss, approximately. Very hard to measure.
Okay, what is animal magnetism? Is there such a thing?
No. However, because the word magnetism is used so loosely to cover our ignorance, people have used it even more loosely to talk about animal magnetism, magnetism between people, magnetism in different places on the Earth, and all this stuff. Now, it's interesting that there is something that I've discovered that's related to magnetism, but it's different from it, and the connecting factor may be spin. I found I can make a really simple device that could be made by anyone in a couple of hours for about $10 worth of parts. And this device shows the presence of a large field around the human body, which is related to the Earth's magnetic field.
Okay. Is it possible that since there is an electromagnetic field or some kind of a magnetic field around every human being, that some fields attract and so
between people?
Yes, between people, and
yes.
Some people that you're, because of the
sure.
electrochemistry, you would reject them?
Oh yes, you and I sitting across this table are close enough to have this new field that I call biological energy field, or biofield for short. This new field will interact at that distance. I've measured it as far away as 12 feet.
Okay. That's the biofield.
No, that's just the name of it.
Okay.
What it isn't a word. So I had to call it something. I could have called it a peanut butter field. But the biofield seems handy enough right now.
What are geomagnetic storms?
Well, when the Earth magnetic field was first discovered, it was thought to be constant. But as I said before, some very careful observer noticed that a compass needle would wiggle at certain times. And eventually people found it wiggled when sunspots were more active on the sun. And people eventually said, okay, let's call this a magnetic storm. And it's kind of like a weather storm in the sense that the atmosphere is disturbed. Well, the magnetic atmosphere, you could call it, around the Earth is disturbed. Magnetic storms happen irregularly every 2 to 4 weeks. Then at certain times, namely about every 11 years, due to the sun's activity increasing, magnetic storms happen much more frequently. And they're kind of like weather storms because there's a disturbance in the magnetic field of the Earth. It's very tiny now. It's small but important for human beings. I have found, looking in all the literature on this, that when magnetic storms occur, people are more apt to be sick, more apt to have accidents, more crimes happen. Sometimes earthquakes on volcanoes are happening. And most important of all, international battles happen more likely at these times, especially every 11 years.
How long a period does the fluctuation in the normal magnetic field last for? Does it vary?
It may last for an hour to several days, but once someone gets upset, they may be sick for a week or a month, and once a war starts, it may go on for years.
How were you able to correlate the data? Were you able to go through historical records, newspapers?
Fortunately, I didn't have to do that because Professor Raymond Wheeler at the University of Kansas had 200 people to do it. And they went back in history 2,500 years. And then another man came along and took his data and did all the statistics on it and so forth and found that indeed international battles happened at 11-year intervals for 2,500 years. Very consistent pattern. And this shows that political solutions aren't complete, that something's going on. Doesn't matter who's in charge, what treaties are made, what the economic factors are, that approximately every 11 years, people, mostly men, want to start fighting. I think now what's going on is that when the Earth's magnetic field is stormy, it disturbs the human body. It disturbs the hormone system or the brain waves or both. And people gradually become agitated, and if they happen to be a little bit prone to violence, maybe it comes out that way. If they happen to be a little on the edge of being sick, it may come out that way. A more common cycle, well known, is the moon cycle. We had a full moon here recently, and there was a storm, and good for skiers, but some people probably became upset. There's usually a magnetic change in the Earth at the time of new and full moon. And often this affects people. It's well known. More crimes, hyperactive kids. Women sometimes are more affected than men by the moon.
One of the things that I was fascinated when I was told that you were going to come and join us on Infinity this week is the possibility in science. There's a saying that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And if we have magnetic fields around our bodies, and if those magnetic fields and therefore the people who reside within them are affected by changes in the atmosphere and the Earth's atmosphere and the magnetic field of the Earth, then is it possible that people could turn that process around and in fact affect the larger magnetic field, that a group of humans gathering together might do something with their electrochemistry that would have a big effect on the world? Maybe every 11 years we could do something wonderful instead of something awful.
Well, that's a very good vision and very close to my own thinking on that. And it's amazing, Charlie, how many people recognize that that's possible. I have been always impressed by people who say that. I thought that people just didn't think about that, but in fact they do. And I think there is a possibility of it, and I'll tell you why. For one thing, the field around the body that I can measure, that I call the biofield, is 1,000,000 times larger than the magnetic field of the body. It's a very large field. It's large enough to affect things in this room, for example, delicate electronic equipment. This field is related to magnetism, but it's different from it. And this field seems to be somewhat under our control. So, yes, if people calm down or get happy or whatever, there is the possibility that they could affect the whole field of the Earth if enough people did it. And, of course, TM people have been saying that, and I understand other people are trying to do research on that. And looks like it could be possible, and that really was the basis of my proposing an experiment.
Do you know what the have you tried it to the point where you know what some of the mathematics of it are? If there are two people, is it just the sum total of those two, or does the intensity of it, because it is happening out there in the electrochemical field, is it greater than two, or is it just the sum of the parts?
That's a good question. I don't have any answer at this time.
How would you said if people got happy? Well, the TM people obviously do it through meditation, which I guess would be interpreted as one form of happiness, and they would suggest that if a percentage of any given population meditates on a regular basis, that crime in that community will decrease and that the life will intensify, will become a better thing than it was before. Is that basically where you're coming from?
Same idea. And here's what I found out. When I was working with biofeedback instruments, especially the kind called GSR, skin resistance, I found that if people were agitated in a room where one person was sitting attached to one of these instruments, that person, although not agitated himself or herself, could be triggered. Their nervous system could be shown to be responsive to the other people, even when the person hooked up to the instrument did not know that the other people were agitated. In other words, what people ordinarily sense as the vibrations of so-and-so and so on is a measurable effect. And whether it's nonlinear, as you suggest, I don't know. But take, for example, the 100th monkey idea. It's kind of that idea. If it takes 100 monkeys to get something to happen in all the monkey populations, how many humans will it take? I don't know. In a laser, if 10% of the atoms in the crystal are in the lasing mode or coherent, it will cause all the rest to go along with it.
And what we have to do is try to figure out what that magic number is in terms of human beings, and what are you doing in terms of, are you trying to organize an experiment right now with a large group of people?
Yes. It's really already happening, and it's really exciting. There are, as you know, many people meditating on the planet being more peaceful, and they're doing it all over, each in their own way. Some are doing it at the time of the full moon, some are doing it on the new moon, some are doing it on Wednesday nights, some are doing it on Sunday mornings, some are doing it every day at noon. And my experiment really consists in asking people if they would do it in addition to whatever else they're doing it on certain days each year, namely at the solstice in December, in June, at the equinox in September and March, coming up March 21st, and the first Sunday of UN Day and the first Sunday in August, International Peace Day. If groups are willing to try it on those days, or anybody, really, then I can make analysis, because the Earth's magnetic field is measured carefully all over the planet by many stations, and the data is fed into Boulder, Colorado, and they give free of charge to anybody that wants it the magnetic field changes of the Earth. I get these now every week, and I plot them out, and I look and see what happens on the Earth.
What type of meditation is necessary, or would you recommend?
I wouldn't recommend any special type, whatever people want to do. However, there is the possibility, because these magnetic field changes are instigated by the sun's activity, that people might want to focus directly on the sun and somehow ask the sun, meditate on the sun. I'm not sure the best way, but it turns out when I begin studying this that one of the very oldest meditations is in Sanskrit, and it's a meditation on the sun. So people have been spontaneously telling me this everywhere I go.
You touched on something before that was a subject of a previous Infinity interview, but for the benefit of those people who didn't hear that interview, what is the 100th monkey theory? Could you explain that a little bit?
The 100th monkey theory, and it is a theory, it's a story, it didn't really happen, is that on a certain island, one monkey discovered that potatoes washed in the ocean were better tasting, didn't have dirt on them. A few other monkeys started imitating that monkey, and when it got to about 100 monkeys, suddenly all the monkeys seemed to do it spontaneously, including monkeys on another island where there was no communication between them. So the postulate, the idea was, and it's a really nice one, that there was some kind of jump in consciousness for the monkeys once they reach a certain critical thought mass. Now, this is not that unlikely. Practically everybody has had some experience of telepathy in their lifetime. When I ask people, I find that just about everybody will say that, or maybe they've had a dream that really was of the future, or a connection with someone else. So we know that that's most likely so, that we're all like little radio transmitters and receivers, just like this station. And it's a matter of, let's say, amplifying it or tuning in to the right frequency. So this radio station has a power of 50,000 watts. Now, this is one radio station, but it can link up with many others, right? So that effectively you told me that it could get as far as Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now imagine, say, a group, a spiritual group, a religious group in San Francisco, one in Boston, one in Los Angeles, one in Canada, one in Europe, and all linking up at the same time. We just might have enough wattage to trigger everybody's receiving brain on the planet. The TM people said about 1%. When 1% of the population meditates, everyone would be affected.
Do you believe that there's some kind of a cyclical pattern to history? And you mentioned the Sanskrit, meditating on the sun, and now after many, many years and lost communications in between, we're coming back to that again. Are we returning to the principles that were laid down by the ancients, or are we just discovering new ways of dealing with life?
I think we're rediscovering it. I think that science is now getting closer to, say, understanding that the spiritual dimension of life is an extension of where we've been going with science, modern physics and astronomy and astrophysics. And I think we may find that some of the ancient religions, which apparently worship the sun in a kind of primitive way, may have had some basis in scientific fact. So infinity's appropriate title. We're reaching out. The sun is only 93 million miles away. However, all the suns in the universe are pretty far away, and yet they may all have effect upon this planet. For example, all the suns have magnetic fields, some of them very powerful ones. These magnetic fields often pulse, and some of the so-called pulsar stars pulse around the brainwave frequencies, 20 cycles, 10 cycles, 4 cycles a second. Although small, the biologists have found that small magnetic field changes can affect life in a big way. So things begin to really come together fast when you start looking at all this material.
Is it possible that the questions that are most often explored in the spiritual realm will be understood better in the scientific realm? Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going?
Do you want to answer to that question?
Sure. Are those questions for scientists? Are they? You are a scientist. You have a scientific background and have spent a good deal of your time in scientific pursuits. Is that something that you're interested in?
Oh, absolutely. There is a group here in the Bay Area called Foundation for Brain-Mind Consciousness Research, and they're dedicated to exploring these issues. They had a conference in 1982 and other conferences and published a little journal about all this, and probably what's going to happen is that pretty soon all these questions are going to be taught in school, and they're going to be so boring that the kids will hate it and would rather play hooky than study this stuff.
What about the mainstream scientific community? How do they feel about the research that you're involved in and others like you?
Well, to my surprise, a number of really top scientific people have liked the kind of research and hypothesis that I'm suggesting. I say really top people. Some of the people that are more technologically oriented, it doesn't relate to how they're thinking. It doesn't relate to how to make a better computer. At least it's not obvious. Actually it does, but it doesn't seem like it to them. And so they're more or less busy earning the almighty dollar and haven't time to think about these things.
But they're pleased that you're spending your time doing it?
Well, I'm sure they don't care. Yet, really, people are pleased, and I've been surprised at the interest in a project to get all people meditating together in world peace, because just about everybody recognizes that warring behavior is literally crazy. It's almost a pathology, and I've written a small paper called Are Wars a Disease? Because I'm interested in people getting the idea that wars are something that happen to people triggered by forces off the planet, almost like bacteria. And before we knew about bacteria, people were treating disease by wholly inappropriate means. Now we are trying to stop wars by means that may be somewhat inappropriate, namely political discussion, when in fact it may be related to hormone changes and brainwave changes that just we haven't known about before. Because if you look at wars, it's so stupid for humans to behave this way, humans who have the intelligence to create this magnificent city of San Francisco and all the things that help us to speak right now and send out this radio waves. It's just incredible that, on the other hand, some people could get so nutty that they'd want to destroy it. It doesn't add up. And when something doesn't add up like that, and when wars have been going on so long, you have to take another look and say, well, what's going on here? Is there something different from the way we've been thinking? And I think there is, and I think we need a lot of scientific talent to look at these issues that I've been just scratching the surface on, and to really explore it in depth and figure out remedies. And of course my experiment is just one at one level. There are many others, such as warning. People need to know when a magnetic storm is happening so they can do something else. Stay home and play. Whatever.
Stay away from the war games on those days.
Stay away from the war game. Lock up the politicians.
One of the concerns that people have in the modern world is that because the world is so large, because there are so many people, because of the power structures that have been set in force, that individuals don't have much control over what's going on. They don't have much say in what their reality is going to be. There's a powerlessness that is generally felt in many locations around the planet. You've built a machine that will allow you to see a portion of an individual's power, at least the magnetic field that they're giving off, and their sphere of influence, if it's only 12 feet and perhaps more than that. Have you been able to demonstrate that you as an individual, or anyone else who's hooked up to your machine that you can sense what's going on with them, can affect, other than in the biofeedback setting when there are a group of agitated people and another person becomes agitated, can one individual affect more than one other individual or other individuals? And can you see that happening in a positive sense?
In a positive sense. I was going to give you the negative sense where we have seen it. Well, certainly. Look at, for example, the power of a really good actor to move people. A singer, for example, to generate so much emotion that people are moved to joy or tears, happiness. We see that. Normally, most of us don't have that, nor do we have the capacity to express it. But at this level, the level of the biomagnetic field, you could say, our vote counts. And part of the experiment is to show people that really every one of us can make a difference in terms of the Earth's magnetic field. That is, if this experiment has a positive result. I don't know that yet. And that's why it is an experiment. Maybe not. Maybe the field of the Earth, as initiated and sparked by the sun, is too strong for us. Maybe there's something going on here that we don't know about, even that we are mere pawns in a cosmic game, where for someone else it's desirable that every 11 years people mutually destroy each other so that their psychic blood can be used by, little green men from flying saucers or something. You can speculate about this, but it's pretty egotistic for us to think that we're the center of things. We, as Charles Fort said, we're food for somebody else. We may think there's a benevolent God, but in fact it just may be nearing harvest time. Speaking of that, I should give the time. I'm sure people would want to know. Right now, we're in a cycle of relative peace. It may not seem like it, with nuclear weapons production, full scale and all that, but we are in a time of low solar activity, low magnetic activity, and relative peace. The next time when there could be a flare-up and more magnetic activity is June 13th to 21st, 1988. During that time, 5 planets line up, and geophysicists have found that when planets line up, it pulls the center of gravity of the solar system out of line, disturbs the sun a little bit. The sun, in turn, sends out particles to Earth. These particles interfere with the Earth's magnetic field. People get agitated. Their personal fields become larger, as a matter of fact, or switch polarity. And it's good to be prepared. It's kind of like surfing, I think. Surfers love big waves and storms, but they're prepared. They go out there when the waves are big and they watch and ride the board. Now, if you don't know that a storm's coming and you don't have a surfboard, you're liable to get wiped out. So again, I think a warning is very important.
Is there a healthy impact in that, other than the fact that we know that it sometimes causes wars? Is there something that you can do besides staying home, keeping the politicians locked up and away from pushing the buttons kind of thing? Does it create periods of creativity in individuals? Does it heighten your awareness?
I think so, and that's why I say like surfing. I think that it's possible to get a good ride if you know what's happening, to say, okay, here's a lot of energy, now I'm going to use it in some constructive way. And I think one of the tricks is to decide beforehand how you want to use the extra shot of energy. Rather than becoming agitated, violent, or sick, this might be an excellent time to, I don't know, clean the cellar.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.